That's part of what we're seeing, the impact of actually getting some of that money on the streets, that we saw that uptick in revenues last week. If we can continue to hold at that level some of the other issues that we were most concerned about a month ago, may not be as dramatic as they were. And I think this $5 billion or so would get us on the right path and send the right signals to the bond market, especially together with the cash deferral actions that we took last week that I understand we're pretty close on language, that there's been a whole gang working out there on the cash deferral language, and that's looking pretty good. Okay, I'm out of stall. I need 2, 4, 6. I need at least one more member to show up here. Yeah. Okay, LAO Finance. We'll start a conversation on the more the bigger complex issue on here. There's only 3 items on the agenda for those of you that don't have a written agenda in front of you and aren't in the room. We're here to talk about the fuel tax discussion that was actually like our first hearing, seems like forever ago, must have been about 3 weeks ago, when a lot of the folks who are in the room testified to some of the problems with the governor's proposal. And I think the suggestions here are alternatives that have been developed in those last 3 weeks to address what seemed to be the biggest concerns that I think all of us heard and many of the members of the committee had, which is how to deal with the transit funding issue, because the governor's proposal was basically zeroing out transit, even though we are trying to encourage people to use public transit and for environmental purposes and for other reasons, for city planning purposes, that we were zeroing out transit operations in the governor's proposal, and that it seemed to lower overall revenues by $1 billion, and that didn't seem to be something we needed to do in a year when we have a $20 billion deficit. So I was going to ask Senator Lowenthal perhaps to present at least part of this, because I know a lot of it was work done by the committee. Oh, call the roll, quick, before he does that.
Ducheney.
Here.
Dutton.
Here.
Alquist. Here. Ashburn. DeSaulnay.
Here.
Harmon. Huff.
Here.
Leno.
Here.
Liu. Lowenthal.
Here.
Maldonado. Negretti McLeod. Padilla.
Here.
Semidian. Wright.
Okay, I think that's a quorum. That's why we
8.
called it quickly when you showed up. Now, Senator Lowenthal, and then we have LAO, I think, can walk us through some of the revenue impacts, particularly the second part. But I was going to ask Senator Lowenthal to talk a little bit about some of the proposals on how to address the issues that we heard. Senator Lowenthal.
Thank you, Senators Ducheney. Basically, and I'll just kind of give a quick overview, that the governor's proposal, as we all know, eliminated the sales tax on gasoline, eliminated the sales tax on diesel, eliminated the sales tax on the excise tax, and I think there was one other part, which effectively, what it did by eliminating the sales tax was completely eliminate any state responsibility for funding of transit. So there was no state responsibility in the governor's budget. He also said that he would reduce by eliminating the sales tax and increasing the excise tax by 10.9 cents, where it could go up. It is not revenue neutral. What that does is the person at the pump saves a nickel or so, nickel 6 cents, somewhere around that. So basically, what that did was, with that, is that you shifted out of the general fund a little bit under $1 billion for debt service to for transportation. You move that to the excise, and you basically kept Prop 42, the part in Prop 42 which remember, the Prop 42 money, which was the sales tax on gasoline, funded 40% of it went to the STIP. He kept that 40% went to local streets and roads. He kept that in the shift over. What he eliminated was the percentage that went for transit. So there is no transit. So what we were proposing in Senate Democrats we worked on was to make it revenue neutral. Instead of, if you eliminate the sales tax, increase the excise tax by the same amount. But keeping it revenue neutral, so there is no. But in doing so, do not take the sales tax off diesel fuel. By not taking the sales tax off diesel fuel, we can commit that, which is a growing amount each year, we can commit that to public transit. So there's a sustainable funding stream for public transit. Not enough to keep them growing at the way they want to, but enough to keep them from laying off operators and closing down buses, to keep public transit going. So keep that sales tax and then eliminate all the other sales tax, move that in a revenue neutral way over to the general fund, over to the excise tax. And what you would do is, for the first year only, for 1 year only in 2010 and 11, not increase the bucket by increasing the transportation amount. What I mean by that is, after 2010 and 11, there will be more money for local streets and roads by this swap. There will be more money for the STIP, and there will be some money for maintenance also of highways. So we will really begin to have an ongoing stream that will fund infrastructure and transportation. By keeping the sales tax on diesel, we will begin to have a fund for some money for operations of transit, enough to keep them alive anyway, not have to lay off. And also, we will have that debt. We will remove some of that debt service from the general fund on transportation and bond-related issues, which will save about $1 billion. But for 1 year only, what the proposal is for the year, the 1 year we're going to take, instead of increasing the amount to transportation in the 2010 and 11 above what the governor wanted, keeping it flat where the governor, so transportation infrastructure is going to get as much next year as it got this year, but it's not going to grow. We would take that difference that we're not giving it and give some additional general fund tax relief by delaying some development of the net, I think it's the net operating loss and the unitary group. I don't understand. I don't understand that stuff. It's about $600 million. So we will have a general fund savings of about $1.6 billion next year. We will have transportation and infrastructure held harmless next year, and in the out years grow. Transit will grow, will be maintained at about $300 to $400 million, depending on how that sales tax grows. And one other thing will be we will authorize a regionally imposed a fee on gasoline to fund local transit by a majority vote, each region or each county, however it's
MPO probably, I think
probably county
MPO.
Or county transportation.
MPO, I think.
Right. Somehow we will work that will be worked out so that regions can increase their bicycle, transit, or pedestrian projects at the local level, because we have now what we're moving towards is going back to where the state was before the 1970s, and that is we fund transportation and infrastructure by user fees, basically. And this is a user fee, the excise tax, because it's per gallon rather than the cost of it. And saying locals, to fund transit, we will keep transit alive, but if you really want to go on beyond this, you have to fund it by regionally imposed fees, which we will allow you to do those regionally imposed fees at the local level. And that's basically what we're proposing.
Let me also, thank you. Let me, LAO, you want to, there's one other piece, I think. It's my understanding, maybe both of you, that there's currently about $900 million in the existing public transit account. Is that a more or less accurate number by anybody's?
I believe that's true.
I think that's correct.
Okay, and so part of the proposal is to, in fact, appropriate $400 million of that existing balance in order on a one-time basis to help keep then that money can be used for transit capital or transit capital and operations, which is it? I always get the STA and the PTA confused.
The
Somebody
STA
explain the
is
difference.
mainly transit operating assistance.
The state transit assistant, whatever account, right?
It's for operating.
And the public
primarily.
transit account is for capital?
No, the public transportation account is the fund that the money goes into, and then from there, the STA program is funded.
And what's the other part that funds capital?
But the PTA can be used to fund capital. But PTA, the public transportation account, also funds the STA program.
And the STA is the transit operating.
It's
But
the
I guess what
operating.
I'm trying to find out is, do transit agencies can use the money flexibly as long as it's in the state transit account? Is that, or as long as it's in the public transit account?
For transit, for the operating money, transit operators sometimes can use some of it for,
But they can also use it for capital if that's what they need, rather than,
there is some
Operating.
flexibility for that,
Originally
yes.
it was Skag, but we're getting...
okay. Yes, Senator Alquist.
Thank you. I'm glad that we're talking about this issue. I would really like to see that this fee, I would rather see the language that it's not regionally done, but by county, because that is really what I think the various counties want. I speak with certainty when it comes to Santa Clara County, and I think for most of us, if people are paying this amount, they want to see it come back to them. So I'm advocating hard for language that is real clear, that says, by
Right,
county.
and that makes sense. I will just tell you that what we have to do is, because it's a local fee, there has to be a nexus between the collection of the fee and how it's spent. And so as long as that nexus is there, I think we can work out what's the best agency at the
I think
local.
some folks, it's a regional transit agency, and if you don't allow them to have multiple counties in it, then you're not covering the folks who would benefit from it. So-
On that point, you can still have it go for have multiple counties have it on a ballot or however it's done, but that by each county, that it comes back to that county if people are voting for it.
The LA County might choose to differ
100%
when...
locally returned.
Yeah, except if half of LA County, if the LA Metropolitan Transit District, for instance, wishes to vote for it and doesn't wish to involve the rest of the county in undoing their ability for the city of Los Angeles to fund its transit operations, I don't think we want to go
Yeah.
there. So some of it will be, there's two sides to the coin, it's sub-counties and multi-counties. San Diego would be like Santa Clara, but we're a one-county MPO.
Right.
And those of us who are, that's one thing. If it's multi-county, if it's sub-region,
And
I think you need MPOs.
I think we
are
need
kind
to
of the
be
issue.
cognizant of not doing something that is going to hurt a lot of counties, and I'm sure there's a way to work
And
it
that's why
out.
that discussion is going on. That is
Great.
the one
All right,
issue.
so that's an issue.
still-
I was just trying to get all the issues for this discussion out on the table. So MPOs is MPO versus county versus city is an
And
issue.
the other one is, there are two pots that we're leaving in the general fund. There's, as you pointed
Yeah,
out.
we'll let them talk about that.
Well, but the idea is from those two, what is this? One is the sales tax on diesel, and
What's the split?
and ultimately that will be a 75% will go to transit operations, 25% for intercity rail kinds of. Now that may not make everybody quite as whole, and so what Senator Cheney is saying, especially for the intercity rail, can we draw down some of the existing money that's in the PTA account? That part is also open for discussion, and I think we're working on
How to
that.
make sure we do that. All right, Senator Padilla, and then Senator Dutton.
A couple quick questions for LAO. And by the way, LA Metro is LA County, but Metro Link is one of those multi-county deals. The $400 million for transit operations, as before us, is that one time or is that ongoing?
Our understanding is it's one time, it's to cover the period from, the rest of 09-10 through 10-11.
And then after that would be the sales tax on diesel.
Okay. Which,
Let's have the sales tax on diesel. And there would be an additional 500 or so million left in the PTA, as I understand it, that could be appropriated in the future.
Right.
So there's 900 million in that account. The suggestion is to appropriate slightly less than half of it now through the budget year, for use through the budget year, and that other half would still be there for appropriation, subsequent appropriation, I think,
That's what was planned.
if the other isn't sufficient.
And let me just sort of be direct representative voice of the region I represent, which is part of LA Metro, whom I've heard this $313 million figure on the diesel tax isn't quite enough for them given what they're out, so something more along the lines of 350 is what they need to be held harmless based on their calculations. So I don't know if there's a way to tweak the formula a little bit, Madam Chair or LAO, if there's any suggestions or recommendations or alternative ways. That's still something we're looking at to avoid not just service cuts but layoffs.
Was that to me? I'm sorry.
Anybody who can
I'm
help.
still trying to understand the, sorry, LAO? Can you help him?
The 313 million is what's expected to, or projected to be generated.
And that's just a calculation, right?
Right,
Given the tax
right.
rate and the price of diesel.
Exactly, from diesel sales tax. So to the extent that your diesel sales tax revenue is the only source of revenue for, from 2011 onward
Well,
for public transportation.
That's what the proposal is in front of us.
Right. So, I mean, the proposal now is to allocate 75% of that 300 million or so for STA. So, you can allocate up to 100% of that to STA, but then some other public transportation activities will not have any funding, like inner city rail. So,
Okay.
The portion that's not the 75%, which creates the controversy in some other areas, is the inner city rail that's funded largely from the other 25%. So, all right, Senator Dutton, and then Senator Leno, and then Senator Huff.
Yeah. I know Senator Lowenthal made reference to savings and so forth, but in my material I have, like for transit, what is the dollars in 09, 10, and 10, 11 then? Because I don't know what those numbers are. I don't even know what this, and the same thing with roads and highway. There isn't anything that's scored here, so I don't know mine. I got a description, but I don't have a bottom line here. So does anybody, I don't know who gives me that number?
Well, if you...
Question.
Okay.
Or am I supposed to just...
No. Let's try to figure it out. I mean, it's partly because we're scoring off of the governor's proposal is what happened here, and that's why it gets confused.
It's just like the other one is showing, negative 200, million or whatever it is. There's nothing being shown here, so I don't know what...
I see what you're saying. Okay.
I don't know what this represents as far as a budget fix or solution.
Oh, I see. I think, if I understand this correctly, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that it represents, on one hand, the same level of savings based on the ability to pay transportation bond debt as the governor's proposal. So that was $600 million or so in projected savings to the general fund, because by switching to the gas excise tax, we obtain the ability to use some of those funds for transportation bond debt. So that's the one piece.
Same numbers. I'm just trying to figure out
that's the one piece.
How much is in each one of these four categories as far as the whatever the effect is that we're going for. I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, no, me too.
Well, if you could give me that, I'd appreciate it. And then some of the other questions I have is that...
Well, you want to let her answer that?
Well, if they haven't, I haven't seen it.
I think I have some of the pieces, Senator. First, this proposal in front of you would provide $603 million from
Can you specifically tell me what the transit portion... I'm trying to relate to what I've got here. As far as what they're telling me for transit, they've got the rejection, eliminate transit funding, and appropriate $400 million for this, leave the sales tax in. I need to know what impact that has on the current year and then budget year. Well, I just wanted to make sure she understood.
On transit.
Yeah.
transit.
Based on what, I'm trying to take each one, and then I'm going to ask the same question for roads and highway.
But if you
How
let her
much
do
is
the
that?
overview, then she'll give you all of the numbers in the right
I already
order.
got the overview. I'd really, just tell me what transit is, tell me roads and
Okay,
highway.
for transit, this proposal will provide $400 million right away.
In current year.
In current year and budget year. It's a 16-month, 18-month period.
Combined, okay.
Combined. Okay. You will keep this diesel sales tax, and that's going to generate about $310 million a year.
So you add those two together, is that what I'm supposed to do then?
That's kind of separate. The $400 million is coming out of existing public transportation money.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to figure out the impact to the budgets when I'm looking at it, because I got a 58 problem where I've got to have so many revenue solutions there, and I'm trying to, that's why I'm...
This increases.
No, Denise, please, I've patiently been waiting here. I've been in here since 9 o'clock this morning. Okay.
The diesel sales tax is budget year onward.
Okay.
Okay. And in the budget year, you provide $400 million to the transit for transit operating assistance. You will also be taking $254 million in the public transportation account existing balance to help out with transit debt service.
And
That
that's
is the
still
same as
18
the
month too?
governor's proposal.
Is that still the 18-month, not current year, or?
The $400 million is 18 months.
Right.
The $245 million for debt service is in 10-11.
10-11, okay.
Okay, and that's the same as the governor's proposal.
Right, okay.
And then from 2011 onwards, the diesel sales tax will not help out the general fund
Okay.
anymore.
Right.
75%
Okay.
goes to
So it has no
SDA.
impact on the
There
general
will be
fund.
no
Got it.
impact.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so there's no savings here on current year at all? I mean, well, other than you could allocate part of the $400 million maybe, but, okay, so what about roads and highway then?
For roads, you eliminate the state sales tax on gasoline and substitute it with a, for the budget year, 12.9 cents excise tax on gasoline. Okay.
So does that have an impact on
Yeah.
my deficit that or my, what I have in the, I've got a $6.5 billion
well,
deficit. Does that have an impact that at all?
Out of that, out of the new excise tax, $603 million will be used for debt service. That is a help to the general fund.
Okay,
That is the same as the governor's proposal.
all right.
Okay. Then the rest, in the there will be no more help to the general fund.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. And
Then-
for the, okay, you ready for the next item, general fund tax relief?
Then there is another provision which essentially pick up our recommendation that you sweep some transportation money in the to use for transportation debt service in the current year, 09-10,
And how
and
much?
that total is an additional $162 million.
Okay,
Okay. That's a help to the general fund.
All right.
And then the last piece is this general fund relief referred to in your agenda. And that in total will be $655 million relief to the general fund.
and 10-11, right?
Right. So in total, the help to the general fund should come to about $1.4 million. A billion, I'm sorry.
Now, is that for debt service on that, the 665, or is that just general fund?
The 655 is other general fund relief. It's not for debt
So
service.
would that be the same as like taxes? Is that,
What's delaying?
Do you want me to
Cohen? Yeah,
go ahead
Mr.
and-
Cohen, why don't you explain that?
Sure. Michael Cohen with the LAO. So basically, as Senator Lowenthal explained, the governor had a net tax reduction in his gas tax swap.
Right.
Here, in order to basically maintain overall taxes at an equal level, the proposal is to provide increased general fund tax revenues of that 655. So it's just as if you were increasing taxes and depositing them into the general fund. And there's two pieces to it, which you talked about a couple weeks ago, because they're both part of the governor's trigger revenue proposal. So if you don't receive the $7 million in federal funds, you'll recall that there was 5 different proposals that increased revenues. This is related to 2 of those, and the story on them actually goes back to the 2008-9 budget deal. So September 2008, as you'll recall, there were a number of revenue accelerations and various proposals put in place. 2 of them are subject here. One is that we cap the ability of businesses to use tax credits for 2 years, and then after the 2 years was over, they were going to have increased ability to basically share those tax credits among their companies. And so what the proposal here would do is extend by 1 year the time that they still are playing basically under the old rules before they can share those tax credits. The second component deals with net operating loss, which again, for 2008 and 2009, the ability to use those net operating losses to offset taxes owed was suspended. The proposal here is basically for the 2010 tax year to only allow businesses to use 68% of their net operating losses. So it's sort of a combination of suspension versus full use. And the reason it's set at that 68% is really just that it's to get to that point of revenue neutrality. So it's set at a point to where the overall package is neutral, and the 2 components are roughly half and half. So each one's $300 million and some change.
Now, given the decline in revenues and everything, or income and so forth in the recession, are you real comfortable about the 655 number? I mean, is that something I can take to the bank for sure, or is it something that might, depending on who does what, we may not know what it is? I mean,
sure. I mean, obviously, all these numbers are moving around, but these are the Franchise Tax Board's best estimates over the last few days. So, this whole package.
Is there
obviously,
somebody there I can hold accountable if that number isn't real?
I can get you a name and a number of someone.
I appreciate it.
Controller, the director of finance, pick one.
Going back to the transit for a minute, my question on that is, there's been a question that comes up to whether this is in violation of Proposition 218, especially by authorizing an MPO or something to end up going about imposing these types of fees and so forth. Would you give me your thoughts on that?
No, just for clarity, I think what I heard Senator Lowenthal say, the proposal was that it could go to a majority vote of the people within the MPO region, or whichever region gets settled on. If that, just so clarity, it wasn't that it could be imposed unilaterally by the body, but rather that the body could choose to put it on the ballot for a majority vote.
Is that what the language
So locally
says?
imposed.
Yes, that's what it was.
Well, that is the proposal.
So it's okay. So it is going to go to the people for them to make their own decisions.
Right.
Okay, on that. And then
Not that some of us wouldn't have minded the other way, but don't get me wrong.
We'll take 60% without a vote.
I'm just looking for the record and see what your intention is. Let's see. I guess the other. I'll let somebody else ask some questions. I got to clear my head here for a minute.
I apologize. This is a very confusing way to do this. I think it's been an evolving discussion, and this reflects the talking points from all of the different variations on a theme that have been floating around for 2 weeks. So I think all of us need clarity. That's why this is
one quick thing to the administration, though, because the governor said he doesn't want to raise taxes. Some of this sounds like it might be a tax increase. I'd like to hear something from the administration.
Finance.
Mark Renaud, Department of Finance, and that's our understanding is that this does propose general fund revenues above what the administration proposed. And to our knowledge, the administration hasn't changed its position on that yet.
Do they feel that this is actually taxes then, as opposed to, or have they even looked at this yet?
This is all new to me. We got this hour or so ago. But yeah, my understanding of the tax piece here, and unfortunately we don't have somebody here that is more fluent in that tax piece.
So the governor hasn't had a chance to look at this yet, so we don't know if he would sign it or not.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
If we put it in bill form, then he could make an intelligent decision. Senator Leno. If we can get it out of here, we can put it in bill form.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Dutton, because since the columns are empty, it's difficult for anyone looking at this to know exactly what the general fund impact is, so I'm glad we walked through all of that. With regard to his last question, is this a tax increase? No, it's actually just keeping the status quo and delaying any tax cut for one more year. So this is not increasing any tax, it's just going with the status quo. And it's not additional monies. The governor wanted to impose a $1 billion tax cut. We're just not taking the cut and using it to benefit the general fund. So I think this is a great plan. And my only question is, why didn't we do it last year? Because transit has suffered so very much. And I can't overstate the importance of doing this $400 million now, because I know San Francisco is not alone in the severity of the transit pain that is being felt. Fares have gone up, routes have been cut, parking fines have been raised astronomically. Everyone's complaining, and that all goes to help fund our transit. But they're so desperate for money right now. And in these urban areas, for those who don't represent urban areas, let me just say, it is the backbone of the entire economy. And without a strong transit system, especially in a city like San Francisco, but I know other urban areas are no different, commerce comes to a stop. And so if we're talking about protecting California's economy and protecting jobs and allowing for the possibility of job creation and restoration, this is a significant part of that equation. I did have one question with regard to that $400 million. What is the formula that divides that up? How would I figure out, for example, how the San Francisco transit system would benefit? What piece of that 400 is related to any one local area?
It's going to be distributed according to the current formula.
And I don't know what that is.
And, part of it is based on, I think it's based on revenues. And I have to get back to you. I really don't remember the formula, but it is the same STA formula that we have used, for the last, for as long as STA has been in existence. So, but I'm just not familiar with it.
Would that be a difficult number to access for members of the committee, for example?
No, it shouldn't be difficult. We can get back to you with it, once we get back to the office, basically.
All right.
Maybe before Thursday.
Sure. That would be beneficial. Sure. Thank you.
Senator Huff? Oh, sorry. Senator Huff.
Yeah, thank you. A little bit of this problem is because we haven't seen it in writing, so I'm not sure what everybody's working off of.
Well, I think we're trying to work off of this and get ourselves to all agree on something enough to help them get it reduced to writing that we could read, but got it.
To that end, are we going to have any public input here? Because we're talking, I've heard anecdotally that transit agencies need $700 million in the next 18 months, $350 million ongoing per year. We're not coming up to those levels yet. And yet, every time we've gotten creative with the PTA funds in the past, it's come back with a lawsuit that they have won. And so do we have any reasonable expectation that with all these gymnastics we're doing, that we're going to yet again create something that will survive?
That's a fair question. I was just trying to not keep us here all night. But wait,
to respond to that question.
There's a mix here.
Can I respond to that question?
Okay, and then Senator DeSaulnier had a question. Let's see if we can.
The funding before was that, and I think the governor tried to deal with it in his original budget, and we've just built upon his budget, was that the lawsuit had to do with that there was a particular formula for how we would implement the sales tax. And transit said, be it the spillover or the Prop 42, according to that formula, they were not getting their fair share, and the courts decided that. So what the governor did was to say, instead of dealing with the formulas and everything, the courts are only saying that you have to follow the original formula, which we didn't. The governor says if you get rid of the whole tax, there is no basis for that. And that's what we've done. We've eliminated that sales tax. And that's what's happened. So there is no commitment anymore, and there is no lawsuit.
Okay, but we still have some existing PTA funds, and we...
Right, there's still some money in the PTA account,
And we would have some diesel, tax on diesel.
and we're going to
so that's
keep the tax on
313 or so.
diesel, which is $313 million a year.
It would be nice if we actually had ledge counsel or somebody that, understands this stuff that could speak to it, but I realize they haven't had a chance to look at anything because there's nothing to look at yet.
Well, as soon as we can get it.
I would, it's very creative. I appreciate the effort that you put in here. I think the thing I have the biggest problem with, as you can imagine, is the majority vote.
Right, the local fee.
Okay,
And
that's fair.
to that end, Senator Dutton did ask some of the questions that I had. So if I understand it, it's a majority vote of the board that sends it to the people
Right.
for a majority vote of the people in the affected area. Okay. Do we have any idea how much they can raise?
The way the language now will be drafted, and since we don't have the language, it says that they can do it for, there is no limit on it. It can be done up to 30 years, I believe it says. With the vote of the people, and they would document what projects they want and how they want to spend that, or what they can also use it for operations too, not just for. They can use it any way they want. We've left it very flexible for the local agencies. We've authorized them to do it. We've allowed, and it's really up to them to go out and sell it and to raise the money that they need, because the governor has been real clear. We are eliminating general fund support.
But this proposal does not completely eliminate general fund support.
No, it doesn't.
By maintaining the sales tax on diesel. I mean, the one comment I would make, Senator Huff, I think in the past, transit has been lucky to get $200 to $300 million a year. This would guarantee them a funding stream that is estimated to be at least around $300 million, of which they could get 75% of which for operations and such, and the other would be used to sustain intercity rail and some of the other things that current funding has done as well. So there's been a couple $100 million in each place, both sort of intercity rail, whatever that account is called, and the transit operating piece for the last several years. But Senator Lowenthal's right, we keep stealing it, so they haven't really gotten any for quite a while. That's why the lawsuit was about. There probably will someday be a repay on the lawsuit that will get folks some money back from prior years once that lawsuit is resolved.
Well, it'd be nice to hear from the transit agencies on this, but
I agree. But
part of the concern I have is the governor proposed something that was it wasn't revenue neutral. It was actually less. It was 5 cents or 6 cents back to at the pump.
So long as gas didn't go over $3 an hour.
Now, this plan here seems to be revenue neutral, except we're authorizing more revenues at the local level. So I don't know if it passes that test. But there again, we're not having a legal discussion here. And
we're just authorizing, and not.
Yeah, I think there may be an issue there. But something else I'd like to understand is, what does holding Prop 98 harmless mean? Does that mean we're not suspending 98? Does that mean so 98 would be benched lower? What does it mean? Could someone explain that?
I think the notion was to try, although I don't know that anybody's thought of what that language is, to acknowledge that there is a different 98 calculation that comes out of this than would have come out of the governor's proposal, but I don't know that anybody knows exactly what it is. I mean, the ongoing issue with 98 is until we get to somewhere in May when we know what the revenues really are, when we've done whatever different moving around of things we're going to do, then 98 will emerge and it will be what it is. I don't know that we actually need language that deals with that, although I think this came from the Assembly and others as a suggestion that maybe there'd be a way of pointing out, but clearly this proposal has a different, less negative impact on Prop 98 because it substitutes general fund for that tax decrease that the governor had. So it has certainly a less negative impact on 98, and it'll kind of all depend on whether it's in the Test 1 or Test 2, which right? Leo,
Yeah,
correct me.
I think you got a lot of the pieces there. And ultimately, the bottom line on 98, and I think one of the reasons that so far this committee hasn't taken any 98 actions is that, as we told you, there's a bunch of moving pieces there that depend on a lot of different factors, and depending on whose interpretation of the Constitution you're under and whether or not you've adopted the governor's plan for 2008-9 going backwards, the effect of this proposal on Proposition 98 can be very different. That said, you're clearly taking revenues that right now count towards the 98 calculation and taking them out, and then you're adding back some tax revenues, which would in general help 98. So ultimately, I think as a legislative body, if you're not happy with what the calculations at the end of the day come to based on this package along with whatever your other decisions are, you're always free to go higher. If you feel like all the calculations have left the 98 minimum guarantee too low, you're always free to choose whatever level above that you want. And there are just a ton of moving pieces at this point. So what exactly holding harmless or not having an effect on 98 means can change a lot depending on what assumptions you're making.
But as far as the pure policies that we're considering right now, that will lower our obligation to 98.
If you did not, you're taking on net, you're taking general fund revenues out of the general fund and moving them to a special fund. So on the natural, yes, that would...
So it would take action from the legislature to backfill that in a maintenance factor form or something?
No, it doesn't do that. The problem with the governor's proposal, if you recall, when we had all that testimony 3 weeks ago, is that he really did, he was counting his savings by lowering the Prop 98 guarantee by $2 billion. This proposal has less impact on 98 because it substitutes $655 million of revenues for some of what otherwise is shifted to the general to the excise tax. So personally, I'm not real fond of making language around 98 because it just makes me nervous. I think 98 does what it does. When you get to May, it is what it is. And we either like the policy here and the notion on an ongoing basis that we're providing more money for streets and roads into the future, that it's more stable because it's in the Constitution, that we're providing some relatively stable funding to transit, which otherwise gets zero, and that we are providing general fund relief both in the manner in which we then can pay transportation debt service, which allows us to reduce our general fund obligation to that debt service, and that we have substituted some of these revenues for on a one-time basis for revenues that would otherwise be lost under the governor's proposal. And the 98, I just don't know how we'd even pick what that 98 is. I get what you're asking, and
and that's part of the problem. We got 4 bullet points here, and it says clarify.
No, I understand.
We're going to, placeholder language to clarify the impact.
Well, I'm not sure we could take that as a separate vote and say, no, don't do trailer bill language. That works for me.
And our suggestion would, at this point, just leave all the 98 decisions until after May. As I said, you can sort of, if it comes out with too low a number for what you feel comfortable funding education at, you can always go at a higher level. That higher level, although it may be above the minimum guarantee in some situations, it could be at the same level as the governor's proposing to fund education or at something else. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and you're not going to be able to lock in the effect of this proposal on Proposition 98 at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what our actions are doing here and what the intent language is, and I still haven't got anything that clarifies that, so I get it. If we do have an opportunity for transit or even some of the tax agencies to speak, that may help us in our stuff here. I think Caltax is here. I've seen somebody from representing Transit Association also.
That if I open that up, we'll be here for 2 hours like we were the first time.
Yep. Yeah.
Which
This is really our only opportunity. I mean, you know, I got the whole time constraints thing, but this is our only opportunity to vet it. We got a clock running, and we're going to be, you know, making decisions based without input from the industry, except to one or two members they happen to come around to, certainly not by the body.
Although Senator DeSaulnier has been waiting.
I've got a question.
Senator DeSaulnier, let's go to you first.
I forgot.
It's been so long.
No, I think they're all good comments, and I don't disagree with Senator Huff or Senator Dutton's comments. This is important. And I do want to thank Senator Lowenthal. He's put a lot of work into this. You know, for a passerby, they would wonder why things have to be this complicated, but it is the structure of financing and government in California. And this is a much better proposal than the last Lowenthal proposal about taking free parking away from everybody. A couple of things on the transit agencies, whether we hear from them or not. I think all of us have heard from them to a degree, and they're, at least in the Bay Area, they're not happy about this, but they do understand, and I think they've been very proactive in trying to work with us given the constraints we have. On Senator Alquist's point, just for me, I think it would be best at the local county level. In the Bay Area, most of the urban counties are self-help counties. The North Bay counties, the more rural ones, haven't been very successful at passing those. So, and I think the voters, regardless of whether you say it's a fee or a tax, generally feel better about their local county transit agency. So, and as it so happens in the Bay Area, that's where most of the urban ridership is. And I know that the transit agencies, they're in a rock and a hard place. It's not as if the people who ride buses in the Bay Area or anywhere can afford to have their fare box go up any higher. So all of this is problematic. I did have a comment, and we talked about this a little bit in caucus. The intercity rail folks, and for me, that's the Capital Corridor, is just looking in the future for Article 19 money that they're now using for debt service, and hopefully in the future we can add to that. So there's obviously going to have to be lots of discussion. For those of us who were hoping for the transit ridership to continue to be more robust, given what the chair said at the beginning around higher density land use before the economy came around, there's got to be a point at some point where we take a longer-term view where they have to have more operational money and capital money. So just those comments. Transit, yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I remembered everything.
I see people standing up over there, but they're all making me nervous because I just feel like there's going to be this rush.
Madam Chair, perhaps just a brief explanation of the city rail components.
Well, that would be nice. All right, wait a minute. If I had, but I don't want to have, I don't want to repeat everything that was said 3 weeks ago, I guess is what I'm concerned about here. So if the transit in particular, Senator Huff asked about, but I don't want every transit agency in the building to make a separate comment. So if we can keep it to the three people that are hovering around there. Finance, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, Senator Dutton, your question earlier. We have not seen this, but this is...
well, you haven't.
Okay. This is a higher level of taxing for the general fund than has been proposed by the administration, and so the administration does not support that. I just want to be clear on that.
Well, wait a minute. The governor's been telling us we got a $20 billion problem, and he wants us to cut our revenues by $1 billion. Does that remain your position?
Yes.
Just checking. Okay, I don't think the majority of the legislature agrees with you on that analysis. If we've got a $20 billion problem, why would we turn it into a $21 billion problem, which is what you're proposing?
Yes, in order to provide the tax relief to the general public that's purchasing fuel.
Well, we would dispute that too. I mean, to say that there might be a 5-cent reduction at the pump if gas prices remain at $3 a gallon, I mean, it's sort of a speculative reduction that I don't know that $1 that somebody saves on the average tank of gasoline is going to go real far, whereas the $655 million that this proposal would continue to provide can do a whole lot of other things and make transportation funding more stable all the way around. So in all of our concern to keep jobs and such, I don't kind of understand that position at all. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Duchesne. My name is David Katrowski with the Capitol Corridor, and I'm representing the 3 intercity rail services in California. We have talked about the diesel sales tax. In the past, it was 50-50 split. Now it's going 75-25. What that does happen for intercity rail is when the money does become available, there'll be a 40% reduction in the current amount of funding for the state's intercity rail program. In the past, that has been a state obligation and it's been fully funded. With a 40% reduction in funding, that's going to be a significant loss in jobs and service, and we will not be able to tie in with the federal rail program for high-speed rail, as well as the connections to the high-speed rail trains when they come into service.
But the $400 million appropriation would benefit the intercity rail more than the others, no?
No. My understanding, it will not be coming to intercity rail. It will be going to the STA recipients, which are the local transit agencies. There will be no money to the intercity rail program. And then ongoing with the diesel sales tax at 25%.
Yeah, I got that one.
Okay.
I understood that
okay,
piece.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to start debates. All right, let's hear the rest of them so we can all figure out what it is we're trying to vote on here.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Gus Corey here on behalf of the California Transit Association. We haven't seen paper. Obviously, you guys know that we're opposed to the governor's budget. Very much appreciate the steps that you're taking to provide funding for public transportation. I'll just say this. First and foremost, we don't think that you have to undo 40 years' worth of public policy in order to provide general fund relief to address your problem. But if that is the order of the day and you are deciding to move forward with a gas tax swap, the funding that's being provided to public transportation, while appreciated, is still insufficient. For state transit assistance, we need $350 million annually. Otherwise, we're going to keep
But you haven't ever
cuts.
gotten that from us, so
well,
why would we? I mean, I understand everybody needs it, but CalWorks mothers need housing too, so everybody's not getting something this year. So.
Well, with all due respect, we've laid off 1,600 employees, and that's just reporting from 14 out of 80 agencies thus far.
Right, that's funded at zero, as the governor did to you, and as he would continue to do.
Well, as you know, Senator, though, we've increased service and routes over the last several years due to demand and the escalation of gas prices. And so we've had to hire people, train operators and bus drivers, and so we're having to lay those very people off. And with 12% unemployment right now, that number is only going to get worse. And so what we're saying is we're willing to work with you within the framework that you've established. We think that there's some things that have not been considered. We think that you can fully fund intercity rail, and you can provide a $350 million STA program.
How?
Well, number one, the $400 million that's being considered is, my understanding, is a combination of the 75-25 split on the sales tax on diesel, so that's $235 million. And then it's about 100, I could be wrong, like I said, nothing's on paper. So 165 million coming from the PTA balance. So that's a $400 million appropriation, is my understanding.
It's a separate $400 million appropriation from the PTA balance, and the 313 is from the gas sales tax on diesel. Separately, ongoing. The 313 is the ongoing, unless, of course, diesel prices go up, in which case it'll be more than 313.
Okay, so...
And the 400 is a one-time appropriation from an existing reserve in the PTA balance.
Okay, so it's 400 plus the sales tax on revenue, 75-25 split. Okay, and so for intercity rail, then, since it gets 25% of the revenue...
Of the 313. What they're complaining about, and I had thought they got some of the 400 also, which threw me off a little bit here. So,
so if they get 25% of 313, that's $78 million.
Right. Which is half of what they get today.
Correct. So what I'm suggesting, and I don't know if the committee's taken this into consideration, there are, and I think the governor proposes a use for these funds, but the non-Article 19 funds are approximately $72 to $90 million per year. I think this year it's $72 million per year. The public transportation account is also, within the PTA, you have the STA, and then you have the other side of the account, which pays for CTC operations, ITS, Caltrans planning. That's about $55 million annually as well. we're asking that you shift that responsibility to the state highway account. It would be consistent with Article 19 in our estimation. I think staff can probably look into it. But that's $55 million that you could free up on top of the 72. So that's another $127 to $140 million that could be used to...
But we want to use it to pay off transportation bond debt.
You could. I think we can get...
That's the one thing we agree with the governor on. All right.
You could, but also considering that the other sources of revenue to the PTA are going to be eliminated or diverted, that's a pretty substantial amount to pay on bond debt service too.
So you're okay if in fact it really
Senator
was
Londa.
the $400 million one time from the PTA account plus this ongoing $313 million, that's more than you're asking for.
Right, but
Right, thank you.
well, the 313 going forward though, that would mean the STA program is funded at $230 million.
If it was maintained at the same price, which is more than you usually always get, we're just going to, it's a one-time to protect you to get through these really troubling times, plus an ongoing sustainable funding stream.
Right, well,
not as much as you want, I hear you,
right,
but a lot more than what's proposed in the budget.
We acknowledge the fact that your proposal provides much more funding than the governor's budget, which is zero. So, but that being said, I would ask and encourage the committee to consider using also the non-Article 19 funding and shifting the PTA expenses to the state highway account to provide some more headroom, if you will, for the PTA, and specifically STA and fully funding intercity rail.
Okay. All right. I think I'm getting some clarity up here that's in the muddy waters. But, Elio, clarify for me one more time with feeling how the public transit account works. There is an existing public transit account that will not be affected by this proposal, or how would it be affected? Not the $400 million was presumed to come out of public transit account reserves. That's a one-time expenditure from public transit account reserves. The public transit account would still exist after this, in some fashion.
It will, as long as under this proposal, because of the diesel sales tax being capped.
But that's the only part that would still go to the public transit account?
That's
in
correct.
the future?
That's correct.
So the governor's proposal did what with the public transit account, but somehow he still funded intercity rail. How did you do that?
This proposal, it sounds like, would take you take the $400 million in current year. That's from the fund balance. So we would continue to fund intercity rail in budget year and budget year plus one through from the PTA, from that fund balance. But in the out years, that
you were funding it with this same $400 million.
Correct. Well, I say it's
the other part of whatever.
Yeah, we're funding that out of the balance, but
only on a one-time basis.
For budget year and budget year plus one. After that, it would have to, the public transportation account would have no more funding in it, and it would have to be funded out of the general fund.
And under this plan, there would be $313 million in that public transit account in the future. And then okay, now I get it. All right. Go ahead, but make this short and to the point.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Andrew Antwi on behalf of the LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. We do appreciate that this proposal would provide $313 million from the sales tax on diesel for the public transportation account, with 75% going to grants to local transit operators under the STA program. We appreciate also that on the highway side, all the funding that's being taken away from deleting the sales tax on fuel would be restored at a growing amount, potentially, for the shop and the STIP and local streets and roads at a higher amount. The concern here is that by deleting the sales tax on fuel, even though sales tax on diesel would be ongoing, the money from the accumulated balance in the public transportation account would be one-time money. And the money that's ongoing for public transport, especially at the local level, would be sales tax on diesel. Obviously, you're dealing with the problem is that you've got a shrunken source on the transit side that you're trying to wedge in local transit funding needs and intercity rail needs. It's because the pot shrunk for transit in this whole deal. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Well, you have never gotten more than $200 million a year, and this would get you more than that. So I'm not quite sure
There's
How
a
it
year.
shrunk.
Well, there is a year we did get 200. We got 600 million actually.
That was
That
to
was the
pay
1
off.
year we got spillover.
But that was to pay off the Prop 42.
But essentially, this would permanently, by deleting the revenue source, take away the opportunity to fund it at the level that it should be funded at, because we also have passed SB 375 and other measures that have put a mandate on local and regional agencies to increase transit service to reduce emissions from light-duty trucks and passenger vehicles. That's an ongoing thing. That is a responsibility that is being borne and planned for by regional agencies, and are going to have to be carried out by the local transit agencies. And so the regional fee, if I can talk about that from an MTA perspective, is another issue. Frankly, the reaction in the transportation community is mixed. There are some parts of the state that might do it. In Los Angeles County, you have a SCAG region that is 17 million people.
No, I think it needs to be by transit.
Local count. Remember, the question is, and maybe you could comment on that, it was raised by Senator
county
Alquist,
versus the MPO versus
that it may not be the larger regional one. So maybe you could respond to that.
From the LA County perspective, we would support having the opportunity to have at the county level the authority to impose the fee.
Or even within the Metropolitan Transit.
Within MTA, that's right. And so we would support that. And that's consistent with Senate Bill SB 375, because counties are allowed in that region to do the plan.
Okay.
And so we support that.
So consistent with 375.
But the issue is, with respect to ongoing sources of revenue, this regional fee may or may not
Today you have none. So
that's true. We do not. We don't have any. But the bottom line is, if you're looking at long-term needs, taking the revenue source off the books takes away a future opportunity to address these funding needs.
I'd just like to say that since 1973, you have never received more than $200 and some odd million. It may be taking it off the books. The one time that it was to pay back Prop 42, and that was $300 million to pay back Prop 40. I'm not saying you weren't entitled to it. You were, and it did accrue, and we lost those. But the state has always, because it went into the general fund, has always seen this as general fund revenues. And this protects us with Article 19. So you have much more protection, because once it's in the general fund, there are tremendous demands throughout the general fund for this revenue. That's all I'm saying.
I don't mean to belabor the point. The money has been diverted, but this institutionalizes the diversions.
But it institutionalizes a funding stream that you might actually get.
Yes, my only point here, and I was...
I mean, which you haven't been real successful at that, because a lot of folks here will argue that we should not be, as a state, funding transit operations. That's why the local option was even put forward.
Which goes to
because, you might recall that somebody actually put that in the bill as a requirement for passing the high-speed rail, that we couldn't fund operations.
Which goes to the point that I'm really trying to make, which is, we have SB 375 on the books. You're asking these local and regional agencies to increase transit service, and you're backing out of a state commitment towards the historic levels and leaving 313, 235 of which would go to local transit. As my colleague said, there are sources of revenue you can go to try and increase the commitment to local transit, including non-Article 19 revenue that Caltrans currently receives from the sale of documents and the sale of property.
Yeah, we're using that for bond debt, too. And y'all are getting some of that bond money, so.
Actually, some of it might go to transit, but...
Transit capital, not transit operations.
Exactly. And so the point is, we would like for you to consider an alternative that doesn't actually permanently eliminate the sources. You could basically leave the taxes on the books and delete all the revenue for several years.
We could leave the status quo and use the government, and not have you have any funding for your writers to pay your writing with.
That would be a major policy disconnect from the mandate that you've imposed.
No, but what I'm concerned about is the rest of my general fund. Are the people that ride your transit need the funding from the rest of the general fund? And if I don't have SSI recipients and I can't pay CalWorks folks, there ain't nobody to pay for your bus rides.
We appreciate the point. The $400 million in one-time funding is much appreciated. We actually think that that's helpful. We wish that was at a historic level, but it may stave off layoffs amongst the transit agencies, especially at MTA.
Might want to talk to the governor about that. because they're the ones that have opposed that so far.
I'll be very broad with the Teamsters and the Amalgamated Transit Union. I mean, I obviously clear about what's going on. And we appreciate that we're being funded here out of a sales tax source, because the Article 19 stuff is probably going to get borrowed before the end of the year. Since we're going back to the status quo ante, and I do remember it kind of got borrowed just like the spillover money in transit got borrowed every single year. I mean, we never really got it because it got taken. But I mean, so whether you deserve it or don't deserve it or whatever, it's more what you really need to function. And we think that the $230 million is pretty lean for an ongoing future thing forever. And that's why we're trying to get...
But of course, if gas prices go up, then that number will go up accordingly.
Conceivably, although diesel, is a sub-market.
Doesn't fluctuate as much.
May or may not, depending on where it goes. I mean, that can go under rail, that can go on.
No, that's true.
So okay. It's hard to predict the future, but probably gasoline prices are going to be higher more of the time than lower. I think that's a fair assumption to make. However, we just think that the proposal that you've got, it's good, it's fine, it's a little lean, and we're trying to argue for $150 million more. I'm not arguing with you about history, because all the history is going out the window anyway, so who cares? The real question is, what do you need? We're down to that dollar and cents discussion and negotiation, and we're hoping to enrich our piece of it, and frankly, I don't care how. I mean, there's a couple suggestions here. You can maybe move the diesel sales tax up a little and swap it for making the excise tax go down in an equal amount, and that could make it work. There are mechanisms that could happen here. We do know that on the highway side, and we have a highway side too, that on the highway side there's a lot of extra money getting thrown in here to induce the highway lobby to not oppose this.
Well, wait, it's not.
Or, right. Well, not, it's, whatever, because we love roads.
Well, I mean, the point is to provide, either this provides better and more ongoing stable funding for transportation, or it doesn't. You can have the status quo and nobody gets anything, or you can have the governor's proposal and everybody gets minus nothing. Or we can come up with an alternative.
I understand, and I'm suggesting that sometimes those are false Hobson's choices. I mean,
we should squeeze a little bit more.
Well, I mean, we're not talking about giant.
Let's not get into all this dialogue. That's what I was afraid of. Okay, let's just hear the comments.
Only in your district.
All right. Let's not dialogue with everybody. All right, come on.
Steve Wallach on behalf of the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District in the City County of San Francisco. We appreciate your efforts to try and find some money for transit. It does help. Won't probably stop fare increases or route reductions, but it is helpful. I think since all the other areas have been discussed, I would like to mainly have questions about the regional fee proposal. I think we have really concerns about whether that will benefit transit the way it's structured. Mainly, this is not because I haven't seen any language. It's my understanding that fee will be tied to funding projects in the regional transportation plan, and that lists new projects, not existing projects, not existing service.
You could use it for local transit operations, as long as you tell the voters what you want to use it for.
I think
it's transit, bicycle, and pedestrian.
And transit.
But if it's
non-road projects,
if it's not tied to any kind of expenditure plan, then in the bill, like the regional transportation plan says what you're going to build for the next 20 years, not what you already have.
I understand. But if you were to say to your voters, we would like money for transit operations, then you could do that.
I guess part of it comes down
to... Do you not plan to have to...
not having seen the language.
Our intention was to have operations.
For existing service.
Right. Well, that's operations.
Or...
Well, you can have operations for a new service, but not for... And that's what...
Well, that's because what you've been using is a sales tax. You're talking about the self-help thing. This would not be that. This would have a nexus.
Yeah, and so you have to have a nexus, and that's it needs to be clearly stated what that nexus is in the bill in order to allow us to make sure we can use that money for existing transit operations.
Right. Okay.
Because without it, it doesn't help us.
Fair point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Michelle Peelsticker, Caltax. I just want to make a technical clarification. We've been applying the Sinclair fee concept at the local level. That is a state-level concept that applies to Article 13A, Section 3, the two-thirds vote for the legislature. As far as Section 4 goes, which is the two-thirds vote for special taxes, the majority vote for general taxes, that is the section that applies at the local level. And
doesn't that ever seem backwards to you? That is the most backwards thing anybody ever put in the Constitution.
I didn't write it, but I know that we have to adhere to it. And,
why? Can we just change it? That's the most backwards thing I ever heard. If we know what we want to spend it on, we need two-thirds vote, but if we want to just do it in general and it's across-the-board tax increase to be used anywhere, it can be done with 50%.
Actually, that thought has occurred to me.
That's the most backwards thing I ever heard.
But I do want to make sure that when we talk about Sinclair fees and majority votes, we're talking about state level. As far as the local level goes, if you're imposing a regional transit fee, it is a tax because it is imposed for a special purpose. It doesn't come under Prop 218. It's not a property-related assessment. It's not a property-related fee. It only comes under 218 insofar as it's a special tax. And I don't like to beat a dead horse on what is a tax and what is a fee, but I tend to cringe when I hear those concepts
No, it's a tricky
up.
one on this one, but the notion is that it is essentially a user fee. It's a fee to keep, for air quality, for things that make the region work.
It would be, if it were on the state level, we would probably look at it as a Sinclair fee.
Right.
It's not really a user fee because a user fee is when you're paying to use something. So the ridership, the fee that the ridership pays is a user fee.
Right.
So I think that we really need to be careful about assuming that the regional transit agencies are going to be able to impose this by majority vote.
Well, yeah. The question is it a fee that meets your 375 obligation that they were talking about earlier? So that, it's a mitigation fee under 375 is, I think, the way it's being proposed. That's why those got mixed up in there. So
okay.
There's a discussion there. Valid discussion, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Last but not least, I hope.
Paul Diero with KP Public Affairs, representing Western States Petroleum Association.
Let's not have any transit. No.
I defer and concur with the prior speaker. We support transit, support road maintenance. I do want to make one point. We strongly oppose the local majority fee. We had a very good conversation with Senator Lowenthal, who was up front, and at that time, the statewide funding source was a fee. I believe that's changed to an excise tax, so that provides some clarity. But on the local majority vote, also during that discussion, it was a majority vote of the governing body that would adopt that fee. And now it goes to the voters on a majority vote. What we have a problem with is that majority vote fee, and the previous speaker brought up the Sinclair issue. We're unclear as to how you get the nexus between having a governing body or a local government or a regional body buy bicycles and then increase the tax at the pump by 50 cents. We're having a problem.
Reducing carbon emissions?
Well, a family of four is spending 50 cents more on their gallon of gasoline, and that money then goes over into this bag.
So they can ride a bus and ride a bicycle and and breathe clean air and like that.
We would argue with that very broad nexus view.
Interesting. Okay. Senator Dutton.
Well, in light of all the conversation, it sounds like this one's probably going to be heading for the court if we get done. So does anybody, when we're going through this, can we somehow get some kind of a theoretical or some kind of an analysis on what the probability of lawsuit, not just this, but I'm talking about just about everything else we're talking about, and what kind of cost factor that's going to have, the cost of litigation? Because I don't think too often sometimes we go into some of these things with well-intentioned, but if you're going to get sued, that has a cost associated with it. And so I'm kind of looking at some likelihood of litigation and what kind of costs we should look at trying to reserve for to defend and so forth.
Yeah, I know. I wish the governor had thought about that before he did furloughs.
Me too.
Let me just ask finance, because when you said the governor didn't support this because he wants that reduction, the substitute revenues here are revenues the governor did propose. So we're just moving them up from your trigger language to real.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'd have to get back to you with more.
Just to make that point, because earlier when you said you didn't support it, I mean, actually, these are governor's proposals. We're just moving them forward and accepting the notion that some of these things that the governor said would trigger at a later point are things that we can do now and we just ought to do and accept.
I'm sorry, you said that you're moving them forward. You're
Well, because we're not triggering them, we're just doing them.
Right.
But they are the same proposals the governor made. He just said, I won't do them unless. We're saying just do them anyway.
Correct.
So they're not different than the governor's proposals. That's all. You might want to think about it in that context as well. All right.
No, I don't want you to move. You're asking for 350 million. Give me. I do love it. You're absolutely right. Somehow I've adopted another son. Mr. Huff has to admit, this is a creative solution. He's smirking. He likes it. He just doesn't like the local fee.
He doesn't like the local fee.
I think they've been very well behaved. This is a real proposal. They have to be real. It's not just the phone. The Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel. What are we doing now?
We're trying to figure out what you did.
We need a paint. I need a mural.
This is an X.
All right, let's just see where we go with this. The notion here, let me see if I can re-simplify it backwards from the way it's articulated on the paper, because I think what we were trying to do here was articulate what the impacts are related to the governor's proposal, because what we heard in public before was the governor's proposal. This is kind of scored off of that. But if we took the cleaner slate and just said, the proposal is to eliminate the sales tax on gasoline except for that related to diesel fuel, increase the excise tax on gasoline, which is protected by Article 19 of the Constitution, to the same level that the governor did, right? Or a little more, about 11 cents. 12.9 plus the on top of the 18 that's there. So gas excise tax would increase by 12.9, which is about 2 cents more than what the governor originally proposed, and more money than folks get today, and on an ongoing basis. Make this revenue neutral by virtue of delaying for 1 year the unitary group credit sharing and limiting NOL usage as it comes back, as it triggers back on from the 08-09 agreement that it would trigger back on this year. Limit it to 68% of income. By doing that and having the gas excise tax at 12.9, that leaves us basically with the same amount of revenues in the budget year that we would otherwise have had, current year and budget year. And then allowing that difference created by the delays in the out year to return as gas excise tax, which will then increase, in fact, the amount of money available on a regular basis for highways and roads, and stabilize that account and put it in constitutional protection of 19, and allow some of it to be used for debt service on transportation debt, which provides this ongoing, or at least next few years, relief to the general fund while we pay off the transportation debt. To dedicate the diesel sales tax on gasoline to transit, to basically to the PTA, and change the existing formula from 50-50 to 75-25. And in order to address the issue of intercity rail, they would still continue to get from the existing PTA account, and then they will be in a difficult place in a couple of years if somebody doesn't figure out something else for them. But they would continue to get ongoing funding, as the governor proposed, from the existing PTA. And $400 million of the PTA would be diverted to transit operations. Is that all clear as mud? Okay, and then there's another piece. I'm just wondering if we vote on it, on these separately. But the other notion is to have a authority for locals to impose a fee if it's found to be legal for transit and non-highway related transportation projects. Is that?
It's worse than mud.
It's worse than mud? I keep trying. I'm trying.
There's no way I can do it. I mean, we can't.
Until we see it in language.
I appreciate what your efforts are, and I really, but this is extremely complex. It's obviously, it's not totally cooked yet, and
without language.
I think we need to take a look at language, really take a look at it.
Yeah.
This isn't something we should really rush on.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Is there any chance, anyone out there, that we would have such language for folks to look at before tomorrow if we were to put this over? I don't know. How close are we? I mean, I know there's been language floating around all over the place, and I just don't know what the stage of it is. I mean, it's awkward to present it to people on the floor. Nobody trying to do, but I appreciate Senator Dutton's point that the concept is harder for him to understand without paper. That's all. Senator Rapp? No.
Can you hear me now? I know that's partially problematic here, but if you got rid of that with a few minor tweaks, I could support the rest of it.
That's why I was kind of testing the notion of voting on the concept, the one concept and the fee concept separately, and then see what happens afterwards.
But that's not, we're not implying, what you're doing is just conceptually voting on it.
Well, right, and that's the devil's in the details, as we all know here, too.
That's right.
So.
As long as we're not, we're not stating that they're going to be separate issues ultimately, but you're just voting in concept on it.
Yeah, but I'm voting in concept on them, and I think separating the vote is worthy of consideration because there may be some different problems with and there's a different vote on the package as a whole, on the swap versus.
Yeah, this was a package. I mean, I don't mind conceptually voting on it, as you said, but I do not want anything that we're doing to say now that the local authorization is somehow separate from.
Well, it's a separate vote because it has more vote. The other piece of this package has more votes than that piece does. And
only in this, that doesn't mean that in ultimate bill form.
That's a different question.
Okay, we're not saying that in the final bill, but we're saying. By our action today these are now separate issues, then I can't go. I can't do that in the final because we have no, that just changes the very dynamic of it. We never signed.
Got it.
It's going to come back as a single vote on the floor.
Yeah.
Single vote on the floor, then, we might as well treat it as a package as a whole here. Otherwise, it's just nuancing things.
But I appreciate your comment because I think it's helpful to the ongoing discussion as we try to figure out how to do this in the best way possible. That the other pieces of it are less problematic for you. But I'm open to suggestion. All right. So Senator Lowenthal wants to move the entire discussion
Except for the K-12.
and leave the K-12 issue off the table for the moment without any K-12 language, at least. I mean, I think it has that impact, and I don't know that we need language to do it. I think that's really kind of the question there. All right, Senator Lowenthal, I get the problem, but we've got to move on something. If we don't give staff enough direction to finish that language, we'll never know what that language looks like. So I'm hopeful that by voting on this, for better or worse, at least we get that language sooner
I'll be more than
rather
happy
than later.
to move for the governor's proposal if you want. You say you need
Do you have a
to vote
second
on,
even that?
You say you
think you can get a second on that. You can't even, that's true, you don't need a second in the Senate. Well, I'm happy to take a vote on the governor's proposal if you want.
No, I'm just telling you, if you feel like
But you're on your own.
to move something, I mean, I'll move the governor's proposal if you want to move something.
Existing law is better than the governor's proposal.
This still isn't ready for, I mean,
well, it's better than the
Well, why don't you do is, why don't you restate what we're going to vote on?
Okay. This is, to my way of thinking at least, it's at least as well formulated and better public policy and better for the general fund and better for ongoing transportation funding than the governor's proposal. It would be eliminating the sales tax on gasoline, except that on diesel. The diesel would continue to exist and be dedicated to the public transit account. The public transit account split, instead of being 50-50, would go to 75-25, favoring transit operations. The excise tax would go up by 12.9 cents, which gives more money under Article 19 protection to roads and highways. State transportation account, however, that already exists, but allowing us to spend some of it on transportation bond debt. $655 million difference that would otherwise make this not revenue neutral is made up for by delaying the unitary tax group credit sharing for 1 year and limiting the NOL usage once it comes back online to 68% of income for 1 year, after which all of that revenue of sales tax on gasoline would go into the the excise tax fund. And separately, there would be a $400 million allocation from the existing PTA revenues reserves for transit operations, and a separate authorization to local districts to the extent somebody can figure out how to resolve these fee issues. But the notion is a locally imposed fee that could be imposed by a vote of the people to support transit, bicycle, and pedestrian projects. I know it's complicated, but that's Senator Lowenthal's motion.
Well said.
I think. And what it does for the general fund, just to finish that piece, is it allows, it has a general fund impact of $929 million that can be spent on GO bond debt, transportation bond debt only, only for transportation bond debt, but since we've been using the bonds for transportation projects for the last few years, this is transportation bond debt. So it's $929 million saved from the general fund that would otherwise have to go to pay transportation bond debt because it can be done from these sources, and $655 million positive to the general fund from the NOL and unitary tax. So it's $1.6 billion net gain to the general fund in the current and budget year. Call the roll.
Ducheney?
Aye.
Dutton?
No.
Alquist?
Aye.
Ashburn? DeSaulnay? Harmon? Huff? Leno? Lou? Lowenthal? Maldonado? Negretti McLeod? Padilla? Semidian? Wright? 2, 4, 6, 7 to 2. 2, 4, 6.
Okay, just call the absent members.
I did.
So she did, but he didn't answer.
Harmon? Maldonado? Negretti McLeod? Padilla? Semidian?
Members, I appreciate, okay, that's 8 to 2.
Yeah, 8
measures out. We can leave it open on the roll for others. And let me just say, this is going to, I think there will be an evolving discussion as we see language as in other things. We are noticed upon call of the chair tomorrow, members. If issues arise in the language stuff, wait, don't go away. I just think we may need to bring them back. We are noticed upon call of the chair, and as soon as we have real language that people can circulate, I think we all need to do that because all of us have the same issues. So, Senator Wright, before you leave, we have 2 more issues on the agenda. Emergency Response Initiative. We do not need public discussion on these 2 items, remember. They've been discussed to death in earlier sessions. Please exit quietly. The Emergency Response Initiative, as painful as this one is, and I think a lot of the points that were made in the discussion were there, in order to try to get to the $5 billion solution that we're trying to present. I think there's at least a willingness on the Democratic side to accept the governor's proposal, at least for purposes of this committee, and move it to the floor for further discussion. Who moves that? Senator Leno moves that we adopt the governor's emergency response proposal.
Have we heard anything from Ledge Council yet about them reversing their opinion from last year?
That's why we're just going to move it.
Legal staff. I understand they're re-looking at the issue, but I understand if we just base it on what was said to us last year, that basically this is considered a tax, not a fee, but
we understand that.
So I'm just curious if there's been any change.
Sure. Senator Dutton Markney with the Legislative Analyst Office. We have no indication that there will be a change in the opinion, but that is forthcoming very shortly.
Yeah. And appreciating that concern, Senator Dutton, I just think if the committee adopts it, it scored, would accept that governor's proposal, we'll move it to the floor and see what happens to it. Obviously, if it remains a 2/3 vote, as most of us think it is what it is, and it's the governor's proposal. All right. So, Senator Leno moves. Yeah, I know. Call the roll.
Ducheney?
Aye.
Dutton?
No.
Alquist?
Aye.
Ashburn? DeSaulnay?
Aye.
Harmon? Huff?
No.
Leno?
Aye.
Lou? Lowenthal?
Aye.
Maldonado? Negretti McLeod? Padilla? Semidian? Wright? 8-2.
All right, and the last one, Senator DeSaulnay, I think, has circulated alternate language to that which was discussed last week. We discussed the notion of retaining the credentialed teachers. I think this is more permissive, as I understand it.
Yes, it is. So we've met with the department. We've tried to have language in here that First of all, to Senator Dutton's point, is make sure that the department reaches their cost savings in this year, but also keeps the integrity of the program, realizing that they're down the road a ways in terms of notifying the teachers, but still saying that we want to, and mostly at the Budget Subcommittee, we'll continue to work with them to make sure that we have the savings, but we maintain the integrity of the program.
Can I ask you, it still says zero, though, on financial.
Well, there is no change in the amount that was already proposed for savings. This is trying to get the department to do it in such a way that it doesn't create greater out-year pressure. So there is no dollar amount.
So actually, the dollar amount, the net dollar amount, and the department can respond to this from what you told me this morning is $30 million is what you expect.
So was there a prior savings or something that...
Yes, there was a prior assumption of $250 million cut to the department's adult programs budget. This just clarifies some legislative intent with regards to that cut, which was made in the prior Budget Act.
Is the administration okay with this change? Do they feel they can still realize the savings?
I think that the language is sufficiently flexible that we would still go forward with some of our plans, but certainly in consultation with the legislature as to the final outcomes. I think we'd ask for sufficient flexibility that we could go forward with our current layoff plans in order that we don't lose that current year savings from laying off any staff. I think this language allows us to do that, and we'll come back as far as reemploying teachers as we go forward. And to be clear, we're also in discussions currently with all the parties to make sure that everybody has an input into the process.
Right.
So I would move it.
All right, Senator Saldier moves that we adopt the modified language. Yes, Senator Wright.
Maybe am I missing, the 250 is still applicable. The zero is relative, that there's no change from the original
From the governor's
proposal.
budget, yeah.
Okay, so it's still, the 250 is still working. This is, the zero is relative to the governor's budget.
Right.
But, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, there was a reduction, and how they proposed to get to their savings was what caused the controversy, and we're trying to give them guidance on how we would prefer that they get those savings in other ways. All right.
Trust us, Senator Wright.
And we'll be hearing lots of it in sub 4, I'm sure, as we go along, as we get their plans in detail from corrections. Senator Saulnier moves the hearing no objection. Do we have an objection? Anybody? You're still at objections. Okay, call the roll.
Ducheney. Dutton. Alquist.
Aye.
Ashburn. DeSaulnay.
Aye.
Harmon. Huff. Leno.
Aye.
Liu. Lowenthal. Maldonado. Negretti McLeod. Padilla. Semidian. Wright. 2, 4.
All right, thanks very much, members. I appreciate everybody's patience. We will be on call tomorrow in case there's any further language or cleanup issues that we need to address before we close this session out, hopefully next week. Thank you very much.